Way better. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. There we go. Much better. All right. Let's see. John's already ready for us, too. What a legend. He's already waiting. All right. I'm going to make sure you guys don't hear him yet. Yo. How's it going, friend? Can you hear me okay? Cool. So no one can hear you yet. But they can hear me talking to you, so they know you're on here. So chat is very hyped. They're pretty much spamming me with a lot of emotes for you. So I'm gonna switch to our guest chat. We're gonna switch to our guest Mayonnaise, aka Mayonaise, also known as John, HackerOne's most recent MVH, and one of the most humble, nicest guys I've ever met in the community. Let's bring him on. Let's have him school us on some hacking. How you doing, friend?
All the homies out there.
All in the homies. Hey, I want to say thank you for coming into the chat early on and giving some stuff away. And I've seen you pop in here and there, so I appreciate you actually coming to the stream and watching.
No, you've got an incredible feed. The information you provide is so valuable. I pull many great ideas from what you provide and the guests you have on. So it's a great resource for anybody really wanting to improve their skills.
Well, I appreciate you. But before we get started, you have been a very I'm trying to say this like I don't know how to say this like the proper way. You're not on social media, so you're not
No.
really you're one of the top hackers, but you're not super visible, if that makes sense. So a lot of people may have heard your name but not know who you are. So before we get started, do me a favor, just give a quick background. Who are you? How long have you been hacking, and what's your background like?
Yeah, so my background is all over the place, but I've always been in data science, information technology. I came out of college in '99 during the dot-com boom. So basically, if you could fog a mirror, you had a job in IT. Um, but
That
I
easy.
start, yeah, it was pretty crazy back then. And so I started up with, well, I began work with a startup company. I was always an entrepreneur at heart, and went to work for a startup company. And believe it or not, the technology that we built was being able to approve customers for credit cards over the internet. Now, the technology didn't exist. And so we were the first company to do a tri-bureau merge to approve customers in real time. That eventually was sold to TransUnion, one of the big bureaus. But I've always been in kind of the technology. And during that time, I was doing consulting work with a credit card company, built out a lot of their information systems. So I sat in a world in a capacity where I was a project manager, a program manager, a subject matter expert of all this technology and led teams. So that's where I got a lot of my exposure at the beginnings of my career with technology and how things work and operated. That transitioned into an opportunity where I was acquired, went to a lead generation company, and I built out all the analytics for a brand that we did television, digital, or traditional type of marketing. But I mean, to give you an idea, we measured revenue in 3-minute increments, so we were tight on the spot. A lot of information, a lot of analytics that went along with that. And then about 4 years ago, I started on this new endeavor where I was going to try to take everything that I've learned in the past and try to break into the mortgage industry. And that's kind of where I've been. We're trying to create a national brand that does a little bit of a disruption within the mortgage market. But with the recent COVID, that's been put on hold again, and now I'm back full time hacking.
So you said you had to do revenue for like 3 minutes. So you had to have the data had to be processed within 3 minutes, so you guys know what your revenue was like during that
Yeah,
last 3 minutes. Holy shit! I know
yeah,
this is not hacking, but I play with a lot of data at work. 3 minutes is a lot of fucking work and time. It's really fast.
yeah. It
Did
is.
you had a part in creating that the algorithm or whatever that you guys use to process that data?
So basically, in the lead generation world, it was a pure arbitration of your marketing spend and the monetization that you were able to generate off of that lead. We had plugged into an existing technology that in the industry was called a ping tree,
Okay.
PING. But it's really basically a reverse auction. So you start at the top of the list, and does this person want to purchase this lead at $100, and then it worked its way down. And so when the transaction took place, you knew the revenue generated. Then we would plot that information, and we would have curves that would show us where we were on the current day compared to the previous day to the same day last week. And then we had a lot of analysis that was done where we did management by exception. So if the revenue curve fell outside an acceptable bandwidth, then we were immediately alerted, and then we would dive into. So we had like 2,000 different sources of traffic in which we managed, and then to be able to do that with a very small team, we were able to become hyper focused by really the analysis that would then point us to, hey, you need to look here, and that's what we worked on.
We're gonna drill down on this a little bit because I feel like you use similar approaches with your hacking. We'll come back to this. I want to kind of get to know a little bit more about your background. You said you came out of college in about '99. What did you go to school for? Was it anything computer related? Was it?
No, great question. So I went to Georgia Tech, and
cool.
I went to Georgia Tech. I was actually in the management program there, and I did focus on, they call it certificates versus minors, but it was in information technology and marketing. And so I came out with a very diverse, I guess, education and knowledge. I knew what the business would need. I knew how technology worked. So that helped me be the person that sat between the executives and the development team, and I could interpret exactly what management needed, and then articulate that to the development team, and then ensured whatever was delivered would satisfy those requirements. And so that's kind of the key role that I played, was ensuring smooth communications of requirements and needs back and forth. So.
And when did you get into hacking? Like, at what point was it that you got interested in hacking and went after learning how all this craziness works?
Yeah, so it kind of fell into it. So I was mentioning earlier that I was working on a business. The mortgage industry is finicky, to say the least, very risk adverse. And so we were running into, I guess, different obstacles along the way. And I knew another obstacle was going to be coming up, and that was going to have a downtime in my work. So I could have gone down a route of doing consulting gigs, which I had done in the past, helping companies, whether optimize their marketing or identify opportunities in their data sets. That's something that was kind of in my wheelhouse. But during the summer leading up, I guess it was summer of 2018, I began hearing and seeing things on television that was describing this new industry where people were actively hacking, and they were hacking for good, and they were making careers out of it. And honestly, it was an intrigue. It sounded cool. Who was, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a hacker. That sounded sounded like a fun thing to be able to say. So I took a look into it, and read some books, watched a lot of videos on YouTube and wherever, and read some blogs, and it made sense. And what I realized that I had a misconceived notion that hacking was what I considered, what I described today as the exotic bugs, where you're pulling data out of the cache and you're deserializing, you're running code. While that is hacking, there's a whole nother, I guess, family of bugs where you're talking about, pulling data from APIs. Well, working with IT and data, we extracted data from APIs all day long, and I was very familiar with that. And I was like, oh, this is hacking. So this is you're just bypassing permissions. Okay, I can do that, right? And so that's kind of how I fell into it. I was like, okay, this makes sense to me. Let's give it a shot. And then I guess it was in December is whenever I first got the opportunity to really sit down and start hammering it. And found some bugs right off the bat, and I was like, okay, this is a viable option. Let's see where it goes. And that's kind of how I got into it.
And how long ago was this exactly? Like, do you remember how many years ago or how long ago this was?
Yeah, it was so December of 2018 was whenever I first started the quintessential hacking, where I had Burp Suite and I had, I was looking at the proxy files and doing it. So I'm about a year and a half into it.
And that's right about the time you got invited to your first live hacking event, because we remember hearing from you. This is my perspective as a HackerOne employee. Is we just keep seeing your name pop up, like ding, Mayonaise, ding, like we just keep saying it, and we're all I think I don't know if you remember. I walked up to you and I was like, hey man, I'm Ben. Like, I'm Mayonaise. I was like, holy shit, that's you. We were outside. Yeah. We were downstairs, right in front of the window door of the H1702 event, and you were just standing there waiting for the bus, I think, so we could all go back. And it's crazy. I mean, 2 years is not a whole lot of time. It's not. It takes a lot of. I assume it takes a lot of time to become as good as you got in 2 years. So what resources did you use to get better? Like, how did you learn? You said, oh, I know how to do this stuff. You want to bypass stuff on, permissions and stuff. You must have learned these techniques somewhere and practice them. How did that look for you?
Yes. So I did not realize how well my skill sets in the past transferred over, both in analytics and also understanding of technology. So I spent a lot of time trying to think, okay, why am I seeing success when others may be struggling at their starting point? And what it really boils down to me, from what I can tell, is that, I'm not a spring chicken. I'm 44, 45. I forget. I'm one of those. You get to a point where you don't remember your age
you
anymore.
Stop counting, right?
Yeah, you just stop counting. But I had, 20 something years of experience. That's something you can't read in a book. It's something you can only gain by actually working and being in the trenches, as I say. And having worked in entrepreneurial environments and startup companies, you are always under-resourced. You never had an expert. And so you had to rely on yourself on figuring out things. And so, hey, you need a call center and we got to be offshore. Who's done that? Nobody. Okay, well, let's figure it out. And then next thing you know, you're on a plane and you're going doing that. And then you're saying, okay, well, now I've got to integrate my systems with this call center down in Panama. All right, how do I do that? So you're always faced with challenges. You're always faced with there was no silo of what your job was, right? You just had to figure it out. And so it was a small group of us. I call it the A team, and we would just go in and we would figure all this stuff out. So my right hand guy was, the chief technology officer, and then I had some really smart analysts that worked for me. We had believe it or not, we had an astrophysicist that was on our team, and we used her mathematical models to detect planets, going around stars in the distance. We used that math models to be able to help us determine response rates to television commercials. So we have extremely wild, diverse background and exposure to different ideas and topics. And and being able to string these things together. But that's exactly what hacking is, right? You're taking bits of information, you're acting almost like a detective and figuring out, okay, I know this, and then how do I read in between the lines to get, achieve the results that I'm looking for?
But how did you learn like these different vulnerabilities? Like, did you pick up bugs? Did you just Google for it? Did you just jump in and say, "Screw it, I'm going to do bug bounties" and figure it out?
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of if you take a look at my portfolio of bugs that I've submitted, there's nothing exotic about any of them.
Okay.
I haven't done anything that would. When I watch the show and tells during the live hacking events, I'm like, hey, these guys are really hacking. I'm doing a bit of glorified QA. Is kind of how I put it. None of my bugs are it didn't require like a super deep understanding of how inner workings work. If you understand an API, or you can identify, hey, that data shouldn't be out there. That's sensitive information. And then to the point of you talked about it a lot. The waddles and the swaggers, those types of things. Those are roadmaps to bugs.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned to you in August at 7:02, I was like, I'm a mile wide and an inch deep type of guy, right? I know that my skill set can only take me so far. So for me to be productive, I've got to get as many domains as I can and find the thin stratification of bugs that I'm able to find within those. And the key thing is that during all that time, and still today, I save every bit of information that I can, because I know at some point in the future, I'm going to learn something new. And then I'm going to go back to that data and see if I can't find an instance or be able to identify a new flag or something that says, hey, there's an issue here out of that data set. So,
yeah, it's interesting because, like, a lot of times I try to tell hackers, like, you don't have to go there and become a master of everything. You don't have to understand everything about SSRF, everything about SQL injection, everything about everything, right? You just gotta step by step learn one thing, become very good at it, move to the next one. Or you can be a Swiss knife, be good at little things, but know a million things, right? But there's no way you can learn everything and be productive at the same time.
you can't. It is. This industry is. There's so much there's so many attack variables or angles you can go at. You mentioned SQL injection. I've run SQL map probably 100 million times. I'm being facetious,
Okay.
but there's no
A metric
way to
fuck ton.
count. Yes, the 50-11 times I've run SQL map. I have never found a SQL injection. And
But
even
you
if
still run it though, right? You still try it.
I up until about 6 months ago, and then I've said, okay, all right, I'm spinning wheels here until I can sit down and watch tutorials specifically for SQL map and how to do it. Then I'll do that. And actually, it's a good point to also talk about. My approach in the past is I'll get a bunch of bugs in, and I'll get to a point where I'm comfortable. Then I go back to, all right, how do I sharpen the saw, right? How do I sharpen my tools? So I go through a kind of a retooling or relearning, identifying new attack vectors, things of that nature, and then I go back and hit it hard again. So I do have, I'm actually probably entering into that phase right now, where I'm like, I'll test and see the different tools that are available now versus my tool set that I created and started using for 6 months ago.
Right.
It's amazing how fast, even in this industry, that the tool sets have changed. If you're talking about when I first started a year and a half ago, I was using Dirbuster, the old standard Java program, right?
Wow.
And then it went to the Turbo Intruder, and then Dir Search, and Fuff is now all the rage. And it's amazing how fast those things have transitioned. They could have been out there longer than I was aware, and it was just me naturally progressing to a more and better tool. But with that, each time I step through, I found little nuances between each tool. Like what is Turbo Truder really good at? What is dir search and fuff really good at? And sometimes, and you mentioned it on your show many times, is like I use certain tools because I prefer it for certain situations, right?
Right.
And I've kind of done that same thing as well.
So let me just get this straight. So just to do a recap. So you pretty much started with learning one thing. Now that you're comfortable, you're moving to next topics. You've made a steady stream of cash from this one thing, and you are adding on to this pile as you go. So your first step was doing the API stuff, and then you move into the next bug and next bug. But what I'm trying to understand is, let's say, for example, with SQL injection was your example, that you ran tools, you don't find any bugs. You want to go learn SQL injection today. Your goal is from today on, I want to learn about SQL injection. The bug type is arbitrary. What are the steps for you, man? Like, I want to understand how your brain works when it comes down to learning.
Straight. So what I would do is I would immediately go and I would start searching and looking for blogs, looking for videos, looking for demonstrations on how people have actually used and exploited, right? Then what I would do is, once I get a good understanding of exactly what are the flags for SQL injection, right? What do people look in the parameters to kind of say, hey, this is a high likelihood, or it's a good propensity for a SQL injection to occur here, right? Try to get a really deep understanding of that. Then I would actually try it out on some of the practice servers that are out there and see if I couldn't get it to work. And then once I've gotten kind of familiar with that and comfortable, then I would apply it to the real world. You want to make sure that you're doing it right before you waste a lot of time. And I was just wasting a lot of time.
Very cool. Before we continue, big shout out to Loonies. He just rated us with 121 viewers. Appreciate you. Thank you so much for doing the raid. I hope you guys are still listening, and welcome. We are interviewing one of Verizon Media's top hackers and talking about how to learn and become better at hacking. So we talked about you were mentioning something about tooling. What kind of a role does automation play in your bug bounty hunting? How much of your work do you care enough to automate, and what stuff do you not automate at all?
No, so I do rely heavily on automation. And kind of my mindset is your computer, your server, if it's not running, you're not being 100% efficient. So if it's not doing something for you, then you need to fill it up with something, because you have additional capacity available to you that you're not utilizing. So what I've done is I've strung together different tool sets based upon kind of the function so that they provide. And I'll give you kind of a run through, maybe to help explain, because I haven't really talked about much about my automation.
Okay.
So let's start with, we have a list of root domains. The first thing I do is I dump that list of root domains into what I call public repos, which then goes out and pulls every known subdomain, and that's using AMAS and sublister.
Okay.
Then I take that and then I dump it into another tool. I believe it's called Live Target Finder or something of that nature. And that particular tool strings together masscan, massDNS, masscan, and nmap. Right, and it runs through, and I collect all the IP addresses and ports. I collect what's live. Then that dumps a file that says, okay, here are all the domains, hosts that are live. Then I do a diff on what I have already looked at before. So then I have a new list. Then that automatically goes into Wayback Machine, or the TomTom TomNom's tool. Yeah, Wayback URL. And then love that you found. This is a great example. Corbin's tool. I've already downloaded it, and I'm already starting to take a look at it.
Nice.
I'm like, because I'm like, hey, Wayback is just one. What are some others? Okay, perfect. This has got Alien Vault and Common Crawl. So it's like, okay, so I'll test that tool and see if, what incremental gains versus time. So by the time I'm sitting down and hacking, I already have a large
It's amazing how
set,
international the community is deep.
Here are the domains I have not looked at. Here are all the information associated with it. And so I'm not actually doing much recon at the time that I'm doing my hacking. I've tried to do as much of the data compiling as possible prior to. Not to say that I don't when I get into a certain host that looks interesting, or I found some endpoints that I'll go and dive in a little deeper. But I try to get as much done prior to me sitting down to the computer and actually hacking. I just consume the information.
So with the live targets finder, that's Ali O'Malley's tool, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I'm going to pull it on the screen for chat to see it. If you're looking for it, someone linked it already. This is what it is. It looks actually pretty dope. I'm going to give this a try. It looks really, really cool. And I think it's time for us to interview Ali at some point. But this is a very, very cool tool. We're going to try this out at some point. Let's push it over here. Speaking of tools, I'm taking notes as you speak. So I wanted to understand, what do you use to diff stuff? How do you diff your work for domains that you have? Do you use AMU by Tom, or?
No, just I just do. I've got a text file of all the domains, and I'm just doing a bash com -23 and doing a diff between the two, and then I have the list.
Oh, okay, that's very cool. And then you said you use massDNS, massscan, AMAS for your recon.
Yes, and to give you an idea, it takes about 4 days for that process to go through the list of all my root domains.
Well, I mean, you're using AMAS, dude. 4 days looks like a really reasonable time frame using AMAS.
Right. So so and then as soon as it's done, it's kicking off again. And then
so it's continuous.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no reason, like I don't want it to stop. And what I've done, I've created. We used to call them workers, and I don't know what the right term is today, but I basically have different shells that are open on that are constantly looking for a file. So my public repo shell is sitting there running, and every time I drop a file into there with a list of domains, it kicks off and runs, and then it distributes the results to the corresponding other workers.
Yeah, very cool.
So it just is a workflow, and it's just always going. So another file goes in.
Bash?
Yeah, I did it all in Bash.
Wow, powerful.
So it's just a loop. Wait for 5 seconds. If run.txt is not there, then loop. Wait another 5 seconds. Wait another 5 seconds. And so it's just. And so whenever a process completes, and I dump that file into a directory that another process is waiting for, also add in a run.txt. It then says, oh, I got it. Okay, I'm off to the races. And then what I do is also I break it up to try to do things on a domain level, so it's always chunking data out. I'm not having to wait an hour or two for a process. I'm trying to break it down to the smallest bits as possible so that I'm constantly getting fed new information.
Very cool. That's very interesting. For massDNS, it's kind of obvious. You probably use it for resolving stuff. Massscan, you probably use for your port scan more than anything because it's faster than Nmap. But now I want to understand your AMAS part. Do you use AMAS just for passive, or do you do active and passive? Do you loop through AMAS for all of it to get IP addresses? How does that work?
So today, all I use it for is passive. So I'm looking for actual domain names, right? Okay. Now, when we start getting into like brute forcing, that's a whole nother game. And so what I do there is I have, all right, so what I did is I took and I did a deep analysis of Verizon's domains.
Okay.
What I did is I looked for patterns, and I call it recipes and ingredients.
Okay.
Right. So I defined, okay, call it 20 recipes, and a recipe could be, all right, there's a word related to API, there's a dash, there's a dot, there's an unknown word, there's a dot, and there's an environment. All right.
Okay.
And so that would be a recipe. So API could be API, API-RO, API-RW, YQL, blah, blah, blah. Environment, obviously prod, dev, QA, UAT.
Omega, BF1. Yeah.
Exactly. You may have, and there may be a recipe with Colo where you've got BF1.
Sure.
Sorry. So those recipes, a long list of ingredients, and then I've built out that, and then I can say, okay, I see a new word that I've never seen before. Let's call it Ad Manager. All right. It seems to be a product and it has some stuff. So let me dump the word Ad Manager into this list of 2 million recipes, ingredients, and combined. And then I send that back into the resolver, which is basically Live Targets Finder, and it runs it through. So there's things that I do when I'm trying to do brute force and finding new domains. That's how I do that. I know AMAS has its own brute forcing, but it looks like it's just appending the word that you want at the beginning.
Okay.
I believe, and that's not exactly what I wanted. I wanted to be able to say, I want to put this word in different locations as defined by my recipes. And so I had to write my own custom bash script, which wasn't that difficult.
So mind blown by all this, man. Like some of the stuff that you mentioned, I've thought of doing, but I've never actually pulled the trigger. Like the Ad Manager thing, you just take Ad Manager and you just dump it in every single environment, right?
Yeah.
Shit. Easy, you can do it with a cut. You cut the first piece of every single subdomain. You just spam it with every single environment. Genius, to be honest. Just never done it, and it makes sense. But you talked about how you do your discovery. So this is what I call usually the initial content discovery, or no, asset discovery. What about content? Do you do any screenshots? What do you do for brute forcing? Directory search, FUF, directory buster, and what kind of I know you talked about creating your own word list and doing those sort of things. How does that look?
So I'm kind of playing around with a couple different things, but give you the main idea is that I run it through. There's probably a list of 500 which I call high value targets. So 500 endpoints that if it hits on one of those, I'm interested.
Can you give us an example? Is it like application waddle, YQL, and
exactly application waddle, Swagger, couple other things that I have found in the past where I know a bug would potentially be.
And there's different iteration of these, right? Like there's different patterns of application.waddle, swagger-ui.json, swagger-ui / that sort of thing. Okay. Exactly.
Yeah. So I've got the list of that which I'm targeting. Now I can do that through a tool called Meg that Tom Namnas does. Usually what I use that for is I've discovered a brand new endpoint that I want to see wherever it exists, and I've got a list of my 10,000 Verizon domains, and I want to see if it's on any of those, right? That's typically how I use that. But when I run through, I go through and see if I can find those. I think my word list that I normally use is about 250,000. It's probably way inefficient, and I'm trying to figure out how to pare it down. But until I hit time constraints, I'm really not too concerned with it right now.
Yeah.
So I run through those and I try to get as many as I can. Obviously, into wayback URLs. That's been very helpful. That helps me get a foothold into a lot of times into a host where you might hit an endpoint where there's like a index.html and there was a weird sub or a directory name prior to that, and they kind of open up the doors there. But yeah, that's the main gist of it. Is just trying to find some endpoints within and then explore out there. And then I'm just using information also contained. Like, what information do I have? So let's say I have. All right, here's an example. So when I run like the URL finder, I group the domains that I know that are related. So obviously, let's say if you had dev, prod, QA, and whatever, UAT, I would put all 4 of those into the Wayback Machine or Wayback URLs, and I get a full list. You may get paths that have been found on the UAT that haven't been found on production, but they're live there on production. But you wouldn't have found it unless you looked at the UAT version. See where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
So I'm using as much information as I can to be able to say, okay, it was here and here and here. But I try to group it together and try to say, okay, this family of this family of domains, what are all the endpoints for that? And then that helps me also find across, because sometimes it's leaked on one environment, it's not leaked on the other. What are some other helpful things that I learned? You mentioned earlier on this stream, if it was pulling back additional subdomains, the Wayback URL does pull back additional subdomains. So I found a lot of new subdomains on
Get all URLs doesn't do that, but it does a better job of getting actual paths per URL. Then I think that there's got to be a way of combining the two to do a better job.
Yep. And another point, and also save time, is I do a sort unique of the results set, and I dump that into a file that I can then run through Turbo Intruder or Fluff. So every time I run it, they create a temp word list that I say, okay, now let's go see what's live on all those. Because a lot of times you find a large number of domains or a large number of endpoints.
So great stuff. I want to understand you said something about root subdomains. Why do you go after root subdomains?
So root subdomains, whenever I see a wildcard, I'm like, okay, there's something there. So let's see what can be found. And just like with anything, you're just trying to find a foothold. So trying to give an actual concept. So maybe you have.
It's like you find something, you want to see if there's admin exist on there or not. But you use subdomain brute force at that point when you see a wildcard domain. Are you doing a word listed brute force at that point?
So if I see a wildcard, that's going right into that AMAS passive and see if I can find anything that's on there. And then if I try to say, okay, is it related to marketing? Is it related to operations? Is it related to some consumer product? What is that subdomain or that root domain? What is Verizon assigning the responsibility of that root domain to or for? Right? Why did they assign it? What's the purpose? What's the business purpose? And then based on that, then I try to then further brute force based upon it. So if it's in like an advertising, then you're throwing in your ad manager and those types of keywords. Yeah, Gemini, things like that.
I just realized we've only been on. I just checked to see how much time I have, just to monitor my timing. We've only been on for about 37 minutes, and it feels like you've given me enough information for an hour, man. The amount of stuff that you have shared so far, this is like the hacker's dream of understanding what it takes to do so much recon. And people are saying, "Oh, yours takes 4 days, mine takes 44 days." It's a joke,
right? And the other thing, that I started. There was a fellow hacker that reached out to me, and he was asking for some assistance, and was more than happy to provide him with some guidance. But it was great for me to kind of understand, like from a different viewpoint, like what are some of the challenges that other people that are going through the process of beginning and coming in. So it was great feedback for me, which I learned a lot from. But one of the things that I tell to the hacker community that's out there is that I'm working 80 hours a week.
Jesus Christ. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of hours, dude.
I'm a lot of hours, right? And I will say this, I am nowhere nearly as efficient. Like whenever I watch you on your keyboard and you're doing, it's like a dance. Like I'm as graceful as a grand piano down the stairs when I'm like trying to figure stuff out. Everything is so innate and you blast through. It's only tenacity that I can get through it, where I build stuff. And
But that's
like
because
these
of experience, though, right? Like,
it is.
I've been sitting on bash struggling, especially with my live streams. Like, the reason I got better was because of the streams. Like, like the internet loves to teach you and correct you, and I mean this in the nicest way possible. I used to get offended, like, what the fuck? Why are you trying to correct me? Then I was like, no, screw that. Correct me, please. Now I go, chat, tell me how to do this, please help me. It's an experience. You may not be efficient, but you're doing stuff better than I do in some cases. And it's all. I want to go back to the original point. It's all about experience.
It is. It really is. Experience is so key, and even not only to the past, but let's talk about experience even to the program. So I get a lot of questions. You focus on Verizon, and I'm like, yes, I am. Why I do that is because I'm very, very focused on that, because I believe I've developed an edge over time. And what I mean by that is, if somebody is new to Verizon, they've got to go through all those 10,000 domains that I've already looked at to get caught up to only focus on the new stuff, which I'm focusing on. That's a tough hill to climb. So if I jump into a new program, for me to get to a point where I'm the front runner or being able to be very productive in my time, I've got a long investment to be able to get, because I have to then not only outpace, I've got to catch up, but I've got to outpace what the people in the front are doing.
Yeah.
And that's a tough hill.
It is.
However, I say it with a caveat. Back to my mentioning, mile wide and inch deep, I know I'm missing a ton of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you have a unique approach, right? Like, you're looking at stuff differently than I am, and there's plenty of bugs for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think you can definitely attest to that there is plenty of domains, there's plenty of subdomains, there's plenty of stuff that you may have even uncovered. Just looking at it, you came in 2 years ago, right? Nafi's been going at Yahoo for 6 years.
Yeah.
And you guys are still finding bugs. Like, it shows that it's not about, being a top hacker and, all these top hackers are looking at it. Dude, Verizon Media has done a live hacking event maybe every 3 months, and you guys have wrecked through it. And I still see RCs coming out. I mean, not to bring this up again, but one of the viewers here, I don't know if you're still watching, Leroy, or one of the viewers, if you're in the chat, drop a comment. But Leroy just found his first RCE on Yahoo. It's on, I think it was Yahoo. It was a big company. It's just insane to see that there are still critical vulnerabilities, and I think the idea of top hackers are looking at these programs is just an excuse to not do it.
No. There's stuff to be found out there for sure. And each individual has had a different set of experiences in their life. They take that and they apply that to the situation differently and uniquely. I'm much more of a business-minded person, because that's where I've sit. And so a lot of my questions of how I think of it from, like, what is the business intent? What is the business trying to do? What were their, if I was the program manager for Gemini, what would keep me up at night? And then that's the stuff that I go for. But that's because I can relate to that.
So, starting, speaking of beginners, what's your advice for that, man? Someone who's, for someone who looks up to hackers like yourself, people that want to become they want to get into hacking as a level that you were in, people that think they're too late to the game, they don't have enough time, or they think they're too old to do it, for example, any of that. Like, what is your advice, man? What would you say to someone who just wants to get started?
So no, that's a good question. So there's several different bits of advice that I would provide. One of the things that has always helped me in my path through business and work is being able to ask the right questions. If you ask the right questions, then the answer will sometimes, or typically, present itself to you. I didn't invent that. That was Socrates. But it's so true in that if you ever run into a problem start asking questions. Where can I find out more of this? What's the best place to find it? Who knows about this? What questions can I ask? Who's had experience, right? You start asking those types of questions and being able to fill that, then eventually you'll get to a point where you will have the information that you need to be able to solve the issue. So when you approach it to hacking, right? Some of the questions will be, what is the business trying to do with this domain? What are the commonalities that I've seen with like the naming convention of this versus other naming conventions within Verizon MediaScope, right? Then you start kind of piecing together. So building up a good set of like mental questions in your toolbox of questions and how you approach stuff, that will help. Second thing is find something that you're good at, and then do the mile wide, inch deep thing, right? If you're good at one particular type of attack, try to replicate that or try to that attack on as many servers as you can. And if you are successful with one, then I guarantee it's going to be on there 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other times. A lot of times that I found an issue, it's steamrolled into a bunch more reports. It's the same issue. It's just on a different server, a different endpoint, but it was the same concept. Also, have patience. Like I mentioned earlier, you're a lot of the stuff that while there's bugs out there, a lot of stuff, the low hanging fruit has probably been taken. Not always. And I take that back. I won't say all the low hanging fruit is always taken, because the past several bugs that I submitted, I was like, wow, that's pretty straightforward. And it was just, API keys being leaked in the URL. You all have tools for that, and you can see that pretty simple. So you have patience with yourself, learn as much as you can, and build up on the types of questions you ask, so that you know how to explore a little bit further. Don't necessarily give up. It's usually that one question that takes you to the next level that will open the doors for you.
Yeah, I see a ton of questions coming in. I think it also helps with your advices. Coding. What was your background like when you came into hacking? Did you have to, did you know any coding? Do you think it's a requirement? What's your take on it?
You gotta be comfortable with code. You don't have to be a coder. Like I mean, my coding experience was mostly in SQL, which is not really code. It's just and then Bash. I picked that up. If you're a type of person that can pick up a book and learn how to write a simple program, by the end of the day, you're completely fine. I look at through the bugs that I found. Like, yeah, I'm reading JavaScript, but I'm not reading the code and its functionality. I'm sure there are people that do that. I'm just looking for endpoints, right? So as long as you can kind of read through, you can pull that out. A lot of times, look at the source code of the HTML. You can find endpoints there. Doesn't require any coding skill. Just you're just seeing, okay, this is what it's sort of doing, and kind of follow where it takes you.
And I see a lot of people asking, it's hard to find their own program, the first program, to find their first bugs and that kind of stuff. How do you pick your programs, besides if the names is Verizon Media? Besides that, how else do you pick your programs?
Yeah, no. So obviously there's a handful out there. I don't know what's private and what's public, so I'm not going to mention names. But there's some big ones that are well known that are out there. I've gone after some of those. I've put in some reports on a couple others. For me, what I looked for was the payouts. So is it going to give the maximum reward for the time that I put into it? Do they have wildcards in their scope? So can I use my, if I feel like my strength is in Recon, is there an area where I can excel? So if it's, obviously with Verizon is Yahoo or star.yahoo.com. So if I find the programs that are like that, I'm like, okay, I'm going after that because I've taken all these skill sets that I've built on for amassing all the hosts that I've found on Verizon. I'll use that over on these other programs. But those are the main things that I look for. I'm not a crypto guy. I'm not. I have bookmarked your presentation on mobile app, and so at some point I'll get in the mobile. If it's going through like source code, probably not going to be very effective there. So I'll probably stay away from that. So yeah, it's finding what your strengths are, and then finding a program that offers opportunities where your strengths are.
On that topic of learning and strengths, do you have any certificates? Do you care to get your certificate like OSCP, or doesn't mean anything to you?
I don't, and I know this conversation comes up quite a bit as far as is it worth getting certificates? Is it not worth getting certificates? I until March of this year, I really didn't even consider going into cybersecurity as a full-time gig. Until this coronavirus really put a damper on the business thing. Yeah. Now I'm looking at, okay, it's going to be maybe a year, 2 years, depending on how bad the economy's hit before that opportunity reappears. So it's a lot of personal things that I'm having to go through. Like, where do I want to go? Certificates, I view this as any bit of training. And a good friend of mine, he long story, he had to become he became a teacher for a while, and he told the students, it was when he was teaching like algebra or one of the, and the students was like, well, why am I having to learn this? And his response is like, do you think Tom Brady does push-ups? Yeah. Okay. Well, does Tom Brady use push-ups in a football game? No. Okay. So he goes, you got to think of it as you're building up a mental fitness. You're building up things that you will use in different ways. So it may be that you're learning how to learn. You're learning examples that can be applied to a different situation. So I wouldn't shy from certificates. I mean, I wouldn't, it may be like a pain in the butt to go through, and you may be like the kid in class, like, why am I having to learn this stuff? But it's the tangential things that you could pull away from it that would be that could be really beneficial for you.
Fair enough, man. Yeah, I don't honestly like. I want to get my OSCP. I'm that kid that asks like, why?
Yeah,
I get it though. Like, I totally understand. But I want to understand, because a lot of people ask the same questions, like, do these top hackers have certificates? Some of them do, some of them don't, and it doesn't really make a difference, I think.
But I will say this, that I am definitely open. In fact, I'm probably over the next couple of months, I will look for some courses to dive into. I know that my skill set is limited where I am today, and I need to go deeper, especially if I'm going to pursue this further. I need to be a little bit more well-versed than I am. And the only way to do that is to, buckle down and learn. So
one more question before we talk about life, because it's a big part of this. 2 more questions about technical. So one of them is coming from the chat. The Western guy asks, could you ask him, how does he choose an endpoint to potentially spend a lot of time on? Any signs? What makes something interesting? Beyond an endpoint, even a subdomain or domain, what is a sign of an interesting endpoint to you when you're hacking?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the answer might be a little bit surprising. I don't spend a lot of time on one endpoint. If I can't figure something out, or within 10, 15 minutes, I'm to the next one. Not that I'm like completely finished. I'll make note of it. But what I've discovered is that there will probably be at some point in the future, I will find something on a completely different URL or different host that is applicable to that endpoint, and then I'll go back and try it. So But for me to pound my way through, there's been I'm trying to think. There was one endpoint in the live hacking event, this last hacking event, that I spent more time than normal on, and I was able to eventually crack it. But I had to go to it, step away, go to it, step away, go to it, step away. I think by the fourth or fifth time is whenever like I had a different idea and different approach, and it worked. And so, but that domain and that endpoint never left my list of top things to look at.
Yeah.
So I don't burn myself out on it. I try to keep coming at it with a fresh set of eyes, and that helps out.
Very cool. One last thing, collaboration. What's your take on it? Do you think collaboration helps? Do you collaborate with other hackers?
I don't collaborate as anywhere near that I want to, and I know that I need to. Just from the standpoint of being able to learn. There were a couple conversations that I had with fellow hackers in H1 2004 that really opened my eyes to like, hey, this is a mutual beneficial type of, it's not a zero-sum game, right? There's so much stuff out there that you both can share and that you can both gain from. But I definitely look forward to the opportunity to do more collaboration. Again, and then that is direct related to my mindset. I came in originally, I'm like, hey, I'm going to do my job. I'm going to knock out the stuff. I'm going to pay the bills, and then I'm on to the next thing. But that has significantly shifted over the past couple of months.
Very cool, man. Very cool. Well, let's talk about life.
Yeah.
It must be, you said you do 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
Ish. Even if you do 50 hours a week, man, that's still a lot of time being spent. It's more than a full-time job, right?
Right.
How does it work? You have to have a great work-life balance or figured out to keep your sanity when you're spending so much time hacking. How does that work, man?
So and I say 80 hours a week. During live hacking events, definitely it's 80 plus.
Yeah.
And then there's times when I'm not finding a bug or whatever, I'll do 80 hours. I'm trying to pull that back. And I would feel comfortable at like a 50, 60 hour. That would feel like a vacation to me. But like during the first 9 months, whenever I was hacking, my schedule was literally whenever I got up Monday, it was a 36-hour day of hacking. I basically went till I couldn't go anymore, fell asleep, and then back at it and go, which is not sustainable and not recommended.
Yeah.
I'm in a situation in my life. I don't have kids. I have a very understanding wife who's extremely supportive. And it afforded, she was like, okay, yeah, you're going to commit to this, go for it. I'll support you and whatever. And we carved off time for ourselves. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. It wasn't a one-way street. But now I'm trying to get to a point where I feel comfortable. I guess it's almost a personal challenge for me. And the fact that I know that there's no end, right? There's like, hey, I got my work done for the day. No, you didn't. There's no end, right? There's always something else to do, and that's where I have a hard time. I've always had in a work environment. Okay, you got certain projects. Okay, the team's gone for the day at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. There's not much else for me to be here to do. So there was definitely stopping points. But when it's just yourself and the magnitude of work is, infinite, it's so easy to just consume all your time. So I'm trying to get to a point where I'm on a much better schedule for mental health, relationship health, and just have fun with life.
What about burnouts? When you said you spend some time, 80 hours a week sometimes, you spend more when you don't find a bug. that's gotta mess with your mental health in some cases, right? When you can't
Yeah.
find stuff, how do you deal with it when you're just you're just hitting roadblocks one after another? You've probably had a few times when that's happened. How do you deal with it?
I wish I had the answer. I'll try to take off a little bit of time.
Okay.
That's always good to you don't get frustrated. I mean, you're your own. Well, actually, you're not. Sometimes you're not your own best monitor. Sometimes you have to have somebody monitoring yourself for you. But know that this is something that was tough for me to learn. It's like whenever I take a day off, right? I always originally I had it's like, oh, I'm being lazy. I'm not working. But somebody said to me is like, no, you're being constructive. You're constructively getting your mind in the right place. And then it kind of changed my thought on things. It's like, yeah, you need to be in the right state of mind to be able to perform. And that takes prep work too. So you need to have those periods where you take time to yourself, recharge the batteries, get your mind on something else other than what you've been working on for day in and day out.
Very cool. Well, I mean, it's good to have the balance, and I think like it's really hard to tell when a burnout's happening. You only know you're burnt out, I think, after the fact.
Yeah,
At least for me, like.
Yeah, yeah, you can tell it. You can tell it with your enthusiasm. You can tell it with your level of energy. You can tell, like I start seeing myself drift into more of a daydream when I'm looking at stuff, and then I know then I know I need a break. If I'm not focused and I start daydreaming and I'm off target, then that's I know that I've hit a wall.
Yeah, and then the last thing is imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you and I have had a conversation.
You came up to me in LA. I think it was LA. You said, "Hey man, I watched your streams. I don't understand this imposter syndrome thing. Like, what is that? Do you know what imposter syndrome is? After we talked, do you have an idea, kind of?"
I do. In with all my teams and all the people that I've worked with in the past, I've always said, okay, first thing, rule one, check your ego at the door. All right.
Absolutely.
Check the ego at the door. You're not better. The reason why you're in this group, we all have our own ideas. We have, and some will be better at times than others. But just be a positive influence to the team, and absorb what's being said. So one, check the ego. Two is that there is so much. There is so much to know and understand and learn, that you can't be afraid to ask questions. And that goes back to the ego. Don't let your ego get in the way from your learning. Don't have foolish pride. And if you don't know something, that's fine. Just be proud of yourself that you're taking the step to learn something new. But don't ever feel like an imposter. It's a bad road to go down to. If you go into a situation and you say, you know what, I'm not the smartest person here, nor will I ever be the smartest person here. I could do some cool stuff, but this lady can do some cooler stuff, and I can learn from it. Then I think you're fine.
But going to those events, does it ever affect you to think you deal with imposter syndrome, or does it not ever cross your mind?
Well, I think there's the added pressure of you want to perform, right? You want to be able to produce the results that you've done in the past.
Yeah.
But you're not. You can't do it every time. It's not. You have to look at what you do on an aggregate, and what have you done over the past 90 days? Is it pretty good? Okay, great. Well, you didn't do so great these past 2 weeks. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's just a small segment of the bigger picture. I've been to 4 live hacking events, and have done well at a couple, and I've done horrible at a couple others too. So it just kind of ebbs and flows.
Yeah, fair enough, man. I mean, it's I think that a lot of cases it's not necessarily imposter syndrome. I think the one thing that you said that kind of like stood out for me is it's not imposter syndrome. Maybe it's the pressure to perform well.
Yeah.
But again, like when people like Inti are like, "Oh, I read this thing," or, I read this entire documentation for a fucking week. You go, "Am I supposed to be doing this kind of stuff, or is it just Inti doing this?" Right? Like,
right. No, that was great. It's good that the live hacking events and your platform as well is a great to. It's great for everybody to kind of see what other people are doing, and kind of say, am I doing enough, or am I doing too much, or
I guess a little bit of pressure doesn't hurt anybody, right?
No. I mean, with pressure, some people handle pressure really well, some people don't. So you just find your niche. And this is all freelance work, right? And you're paid on what you produce. So the only true pressure is the pressure you put on yourself. And if you got to be a little forgiving at times.
Well, I think that's all the questions I had. You said you watched the stream, so I think you know where this is about to go. We're going to play our question game. The first part of it is I ask you some really easy questions about your background with bug bounties, and then we jump into some fun questions. Let's start it off with, do you know what was the first program you ever hacked on?
That was definitely Verizon.
Do you remember what your first bounty was?
Don't remember my first bounty, but I do remember my first big bounty, and it was a critical on an admin panel with PII.
How much was do you remember how much was your first bounty is what I'm trying to ask?
Oh, I would say 3,000.
And do you remember, did you do anything to celebrate with that?
No, I didn't. Okay. I had gone basically 2 years without a salary prior to that, so I was like,
fair enough.
All right, to the
bank. What is your favorite bug type?
Oh, criticals. And that's just the answer you're looking for. I do like I like IDOR, information disclosure. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any fun or memorable purchases with your bounties recently that you could go, this is what bug bounties made happen for me?
I'll skip that. No, there's not. I'm not a spender.
No cars, house, wedding, gifts.
No, absolutely not. I haven't treated myself yet, but that'll come at some point.
You're almost due, man. I think you're due for a vacation or something, man.
Yes.
Where you gotta spend some money and you gotta dip into that pocket a little bit.
that is you nailed it on the head. Vacation. That's definitely something that I owe my wife many years over. So that's on the list.
Any hackers you want to collaborate with that you would want to shout them out?
Sure. Let's Corbin, Naffy, Doggy G. A lot of people mentioned Mark. He'd be great to collaborate with. I would like to get to people that focus on bugs that I'm not familiar with and that I can learn from. So I'd have to research that a little bit more, but people that do some of the deserialization and the remote code execution and that stuff, I haven't had those bugs. And our SQL injection, I would love to have somebody that's an expert at SQL injection be able to sit down and explain how to use SQL map.
Fair enough. Do you have a favorite tool that you rely on heavily outside of Burp Suite?
Ooh. Well, it's hard to say one because they all have a role. It's the pieces are greater. I guess the pieces make something much bigger than the individual. I guess AMAS is probably one that has helped me out the most.
Okay, and then what about Burp plugins? Do you use any Burp plugins at all?
I do. I mentioned Turbo Intruder.
Yeah.
I played around with what was it, the JS script finder a little bit. That's helped out some. I have active the additional scanner and / running all the time,
Okay.
but I'm not really getting much additional benefit out of that. And those are the ones that come top of mind right now.
Okay. And then one last one, hobbies, man. What does John do when he's not hacking?
You know what? I am looking forward to get back on the golf course, believe it or not.
Very nice.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. I am a huge music buff. They call it old school now, but I love music from the late 80s and 90s, college music. So, the Sonic Youth, Pixies, Dinosaur Jr. And that's kind of my wheelhouse. So I listen to a lot of music.
Very cool. Let's do our word game. I give you a word, one sentence, one word, whatever you want to give back to me, something quick. I don't know how to ask this, but data or data analytics?
Gold. Gold.
Recon.
Crafty.
Verizon Media.
Life-changing.
Collaboration.
Eager to start.
HackerOne.
Disruptive genius.
Live hacking events.
Ineffable.
And I think I need to start asking this one too. Virtual live hacking events.
Oh yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was rewarding.
Bash.
Mandatory.
And then AMAS.
Helpful.
And last but not least, this is the last thing you mentioned, golfing.
Miss it.
Well, hey man, before I let you go, chat, please give it up for John, also known as Mayonaise or Mayonaise. Which one do you prefer, Mayonaise or Mayonaise?
It doesn't matter. It was pulling from a Smashing Pumpkins song. It's the song's Mayonnaise, as everybody calls it, but I read where Billy Corgan said it was really pronounced "my own eyes," and I thought that was appropriate for hacking because it's only my own eyes that see this. So that's how I got it.
That's awesome. Well, chat, let's spam a little bit of emotes. Let's give it up for John. This was honestly, man, one of the greatest interviews I've done. You were very cool at sharing everything. You didn't hold back, so I really appreciate you being so open. Not that the other guests don't share, but you were going into details of showing your workflow, and you were very open about it. I learned a ton from this, and I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this Sunday and being a part of this community. I seriously appreciate it.
Ben, it's my pleasure, and I appreciate you. And what you're building here is amazing, and keep up the great work. But
thank you, man. I appreciate that. Once again, this is John, aka Mayonaise or Mayonaise. I did a combination of both. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing what you got going on in the next live hacking event. And I look forward to seeing you in person again.
Look forward to it as well. Have a good one.
Cool, man. See ya.
All right, see you.
What a champ. This was